Hello and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We are going to be doing a NECROMUNDA base painting tutorial. So I'm starting to get into NECROMUNDA now, and I thought what better video to put up than how to paint the bases. So this is kind of one of the fun parts of the build process for NECROMUNDA for me. And basically I'm going to show you now how to paint a NECROMUNDA base. So we're going to start off with a plain black base like this, just undercoated using Chaos Black spray, and we're going to end up with something like this. So this is a very worn, very battered, it's got some rust marks, things like that, it just sets off the model a little bit better. And then when it's all fully painted and done, we will then have a model to attach. So without further ado, let's get started. So what I'm going to do, I'll put this here, I'm going to run through some of the paints that we're going to be using today. So we're going to be using, first of all, matte black from Army Painter. This will be used for hazard markings, filling in gaps, vents, things like that. Put that over there. We're going to be using Avalanche Sunset, which is a Citadel paint. This will be used for the hazard stripes for the yellow markings. We're going to be using our main colour, which is going to be Lead Belcher. So this is quite a good colour to use, and it's got very good coverage, but we're not going to be painting it on, we're going to be using a different method. We've got Rise of Rust, so this will be used in dribs and drabs basically, just to highlight another colour that we'll be using, but this will be used by the stippling effect. We've got Vallejo's Model Air Silver, this is the number for it if you want to know. So this will be basically just getting stippled on later, and I'll show you the technique that we use for that. I'm going to be using the Vallejo Surface Primer again. This will be used in a different way, we won't be painting this on or using an airbrush in fact. And we have our two washes here, so I'll be using Dark Tone from Army Painter. This does come in a bottle a bit like this, but what I do is I transfer them into these Citadel bottles, because then at least when I use them, I can just use stuff straight out of the pot. And also we will be using this Agrax Earthshade. Again, this is a very nice colour to use. I would have used the Army Painter one, but it doesn't give me the effect that I want that Agrax Earthshade does. So that's the paints we're going to be using for this. And we're going to be using a few things that are a little bit different. So we're using our basic paintbrush here, so I use the Insane Detail brush from Army Painter, and we will be using a few other things today. So we will be using these. So these are makeup brushes, so you can pick these up literally anywhere. You can go to places like Wilkinson's, Boots, Poundland. These things are literally everywhere. You can pick them up for next to nothing. I got a set of about 10 of these, all different sizes. This one's a round one. These ones are two flat ones, one's thicker than the other. And I got to say, I got a set of 10 of these for £1. So, these are the brushes that we're going to be using today. So, without further ado, we will start. And we'll start with our first colour of the day, which is going to be Lead Belcher. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this straight out of the pot. I do have a little wet palette type thing to the side there, but, it's just going to be there for things like dry brushing and what have you. So what we're going to do, we're going to get some of the Lead Belcher on our brush a little bit off onto the palette, and instead of painting this on, what we're going to do is we're going to stipple it on. So we're just going to go over the whole base like this, and we're just going to roughly stipple it on. So I'm not being very neat, I'm not being very specific in where I'm doing it, I'm just going around the base. So the reason why I'm doing this is because if we just painted this on, this would give us a very uniform silver, and that's not the effect that I'm trying to achieve here. I'm trying to achieve a rough metal look, so putting this over the top is going to give it more of a, as you can see, it looks a lot more battered and a lot more non-uniform. So that's the first colour we're going to be putting on. There we go. So what I'll do, I'll let this dry and I'll be back in just... Okay, so this is now dried to the touch. So what we're going to do now is we're now going to apply our first wash. So I'm going to be using the dark tone from Army Painter. So just give it a little bit of a shake, crack the pot. The reason why I tend to put these into GW paint pots is mainly due to the fact of the lid. So, you know, with one of the Army Painter ones, you have to squirt it onto a wet palette. You know, you can be quite wasteful when you're using those kind of pots. So they're good for paints because you don't waste your paints. But with washes, you know, you want to kind of be a little bit more sloppy, as it were. So I'm just going to load my brush up with the dark tone from Army Painter, and I'm just going to slap this all over them all. So I'm not going to be, I'm not going to be stingy with it. I'm going to be quite generous, focusing on mainly in all the cracks and all the little rivets and things. You know, if it does pool in certain areas, then I will try and drag it out with my brush a little bit. But we're not going for a uniform effect here. So if it's a bit more pooled in one place, that's good. That's what we want, because when this dries, it will leave little dark patches and places, places where you'd expect bits of rust and bits of dirt and grime and stuff to accumulate. So just going to go around these little rivets here, just make sure I've filled in all these little grates as well. I'll make sure these are filled in a bit because these will be getting painted black later on. Right, so now this wash has been applied, I'll let this dry and I'll be back in just a second. Right, so there's that part now done, all dry. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to our next step, where we're going to start focusing mainly on the hazard striping. So what we're going to do, we're going to start off with our base layer of Avalanche Sunset. So I'll just give this a quick shake, there we go. What we're going to do, we're going to look on our base and we're going to see where we want to place it, where you want to put the hazard markings. So for me personally, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this section here, and I'm going to make this into the hazard marking area. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to load up my brush, as again, I'm not going to be very neat. When they're obviously making all these hazard markings, they're not being very neat. So I'm just going to follow along the edges first, just to block that in a little bit. I am going to paint over the rivets because they will then get filled in again later. And you've got to remember, you're in the underhive, so, they're not going to really worry about covering up rivets before they paint, So we're going to go all around here. So this first coat doesn't have to be very neat because we will be going over it again after we've done the hazard markings with the yellow, just to bring that out a little bit more. So again, along the edges. I'm using this straight out of the pot. I'm not even going to bother watering this down or thinning it down in any way, because I don't want to thin it down. It's a bit more hassle, and it's not really what I want to do really. And anyway, if you do get streaky marks on it like this, it's perfectly fine. It all just adds to the effect. So there we go. So that is the first part. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to tell you what I use for the hazard markings. So a few weeks ago I started doing a tie pilot gear for my one of my costumes I use for when I go to conventions, and I had to buy some of this stuff. So this is automotive pinstriping. So this is the kind of stuff you see when people mask off cars for things like flames on hot rods and things like that. So you've got I think that's a 5mm and a 3mm. I'm not quite sure what the sizes are. I think it's 5 and 3. But what I do is I use this for the pinstriping, not pinstriping, the hazard markings. So what I'll do is I'll just slice a little bit with a Stanley knife, cut a little bit off, and that makes a perfect line. You can achieve the exact same effect with things like masking tape. If you haven't got any masking tape, you can use blue tack if you have to. You can use anything you can find around the house. You don't even have to use any tapes. If you think you're confident enough using the freehand, then by all means use your freehand. But I just find that it gives a little bit more of an even effect, and it always does help to just have a little bit of masking off. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to let this dry for a second, and I'll be back in just a second. Okay, so the yellow is now dry, and what we're going to do, we're going to start to do our hazard markings. So I've cut some strips of this off. What I'm going to do, I'm going to run this down the middle first of all. So I'm going to place that one right there, just like that. I'm not going to press it down very firm because I don't want it to pull any of the paint up. You know, I want it to kind of just be tacky but not enough to do any damage. So these other two have just stuck to my paint mat a little bit too much. So there's the first one. As you can see, I have used these ones previously, so I'm just going to space it out a little bit evenly. Again, I'm not being overly careful of where I put these because it's the underhive. You know, nothing's going to be perfect. Right, so I think that'll do nicely. Move that one over just a tad, just like that. And there we go. That's how our hazard markings are going to look. As you can see, I can take this off. It doesn't leave any paint strip. So what I'm going to do now, pop some matte black onto my palette. Not a lot, just a little tiny bit. You don't need a lot for this. We're going to do another little step with the matte black now anyway. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to get my army painter brush now. Load it up with some black. And then I'm just going to paint this whole area in black. Just painting straight over the top of the pinstripe and stuff. You know, I'm not being neat. I'm not being careful. Obviously I am being a little bit careful as to where I am painting, so I don't want to get any on the silver. There we go, just a bit like that and a little tiny bit more. And there you have it. So there's that part all done. So what I'm going to do, just make sure that's all nice and smooth, just like that. So as you can see, it's now all been completely covered. And what I'm going to do, I'm now going to remove the tape off here very gently and hope that I don't pull any of the yellow paint off. So there's the first one. There's the second one. Oh, and I have pulled some paint off. It's okay, we can go back and remedy that. And there's that third one. So that one has pulled a little bit of paint off as well, but as I said, we can easily just go back with that now with a bit of Avalon Sunset. Just load the brush up again. Just like this. And then we will just manually pick out the lines. So I would have done this part anyway, where I would have manually gone through and just put in some lines, just like that. Because obviously the tape is good, you know, it gives you the basic line that you're after. But it's not always perfect. And as Bob Ross says, you know, it's always happy little accidents. Yeah, so there's some of the yellow recovered. And I'll do the same with the black. So again, load my brush up. And then just go in over the top with the black again. So as you can see, it has covered a little bit of the rivets as well, but these will be getting picked out in a bit more detail with the next stage, which is where we're going to start adding the brown wash. And obviously a good highlight for colours like yellow is you know, brown does work quite well. So there we go, there's some of the hazard markings. So obviously they've come out okay, not as well as I'd hoped, but you know, as I said, I'm not going for the achievement of perfect here. I'm literally doing this just for the fact that, you know, it's the underhive. As you can see, compared to that one, you know, we're nearly there. So as I said, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pop some, oh hang on, first of all we'll do the grills and the vents. So what I'm just going to do is get some black on my brush again. Just go into those little grill sections there. Just paint them black. I like to think these are kind of like sewer entrance grates, you know, like water runoff, that kind of thing. You know, and it just adds that little more depth to the base as well, because you got to remember these bases are kind of part of the model. You know, they're not like your average Warhammer base where you can just whack a bit of static grass on, you know, put a bit of dirt on it. No one really tends to look much at the bases because they're all staring at the models, whereas these and the bases are kind of part of the model. So it is always worth doing that little bit extra just to make it pop. So there's those grates all painted in black. And now we can do the wash part. And so for this, I'm just going to use my old scrappy brush. So this is a brush I've had for probably about 3 or 4 years now. It was an old regiment brush. It served the purpose, you know, it's still got some bristles on it, so I now use this pretty much as a wash brush. So I'm going to shake my Agrax Earthshade. I'm going to get a little bit on the end of this now, and what I'm going to do is I'm not going to wash the whole model, I'm just going to dab it in places. So I'm just going to go like this on here, dab it around here, just going to make it look like it's got little dirty patches everywhere. So obviously we still want some of the silver show, as you can see from the reflection there, you can see a little bit better. We just want a little bit of that dirt to still show through. And then that should hopefully, when it's dried, get this effect. So as you can see on here, I don't know if you can see, but there's like little brown patches like around here and up here. It's probably just because my light's a bit too bright. But basically it just makes it look like you've got rusty metal, which is kind of the effect we're going for. So what I'll do is I'll let this dry now, and I'll be back with you in just a second. Okay, so we're back, and that's now finished drying. So it did take probably about 3 or 4 minutes to dry, but as you can see now on the model, on the base, you can see these little patches. So these basically just look like little bits of worn metal, you know, where it's rusted over time or a little bit dirty, and that's kind of the effect we're going for, really. What we're going to do now is we're just going to go back over the yellow slightly, and we're just going to do some quick highlights on there while that's dry. So what we're going to do, we're going to pick out the rivets. So hold this about here so you can see. We're just going to pick out the rivets, just like that. So we're using the exact same paint again, so we're just using the Avalanche Sunset, and then we're just going to go over the area again. Just neaten up those lines a little bit. Just like this. So once this on the rivets, it'll then basically help the effect. So when we pop on the rivets, what we'll do is we'll then do a little bit of a recess shade around the rivets. So the yellow will then kind of poke through a little bit. And as you can see, it is kind of brightening up the yellow compared to what it used to be. So it used to be kind of like a dullish yellow now. Now we're putting the yellow over the top, it is brightening it up a little bit. So it's making it just a little stand out, just that little bit extra. Just like this. So we'll just go along the edges. Get some nice crisp lines. Again, I'm using this straight out of the pot, I'm not bothering to water this down or do any thin coats or anything. Flip them all around as well, you know, so we can just get those little crisp lines going. Lovely job, there we go. So what we've done now is we've just picked out those hazard lines just a little bit better. So now whilst we're doing the other couple of steps, we can then wait for that to dry, and then we'll apply a recess shade. So now this is where all the makeup brushes are going to start coming in. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little round makeup brush. So this is kind of like a little round. Let me see if I can get this to focus on it. Round. And what we're going to be doing with this is we're going to be doing a stippling effect. So I'm going to then use some of this stuff, the surface primer. The reason why I chose this is because this is a red brown. So rather than just using a basic brown like Mornfang, or just using a red, I chose this one because it adds more of a rusty effect. So I'm going to pop a little tiny bit on my palette. You don't need to use a lot of this because you'll be using it to stipple on, so just pop that over there. I'm now going to basically brush all of this into my bristles. So with dry brushing, what you do is you load up your paintbrush, and then you essentially wipe all of the paint off. So when you do that, you're not getting very much come off. So what we're going to do now is we're going to stipple this into little places we think we want rust. So I want some around this corner here. I'm probably going to put some up here. You want it in random areas, so I'll probably do some down here as well. And all we're going to do, we're just going to do a little stippling motion. As you can see, it's given us a little bit of a brown patch. And because this is a red brown, it doesn't look like Mornfang, so it's not deep brown. It's just kind of nice, it's got like a nice little red tint to it. So it's, it makes it look a bit more rusty. And with the highlight we'll put over the top, it'll kind of help it a little bit more. So again, just use your hand as a little bit of a guide, and then we're just gonna again just stipple on. So you will have to push quite firmly down onto the base to get the stipple on going. I think I'll put a little bit up in the top corner here. There we go. And a little bit there. There you go. So there we go. We've got our 4 little patches of rust now. And again, this is just using the stipple. So what I'm just basically doing is, say my hand's at the base, I'm going in a downwards motion like that, and I'm just pushing it down, and then just going round in circles. And as you go round to the edges, you can kind of feather it out a little tiny bit more and thin it out. Alright, so I'm going to clean my brush off because we'll be using this one again. So when you're doing dry brushing, make sure your brush is very, very dry. Because if you try and do dry brushing with a wet brush, you're just going to get streaks. It's not what you want. So what I do to test it is, when I've dried it, I'll go like that between my fingers, and that way you can feel if there's any moisture. Plus a little bit of friction heats it up. It helps. So now we're going to step onto the Rise of Rust. So this is a dry paint. Perfect, absolutely perfect for rust, because it is a dry paint. So you don't have to use a lot, you just dab it in and you get a little bit on your brush like this. You can use Troll Slayer Orange if you want, or an equivalent from Army Painter or Vallejo, but I just find this one a lot easier to use. So then what I'll do now is I'll do the same as what I did last time. I'll just dab this onto my wet palette, or my dry palette should I say, and I'm going to do the exact same. So I'm going to make sure there's not too much on that. No, that's perfect, so I'll move this out of the way. And then what we're going to do, we're just going to lightly stipple this right over the top of the brown patches we've just done. So this bit here, for example, what we're going to do, just going to lightly jab it onto it. Then you should see it starting to come through slightly. So I'm just going to load that up with a bit more. And what you want is that nice little speckly pan. So if you get little bits where hasn't come off properly, that's perfect. So a few little dabs there, like that. There you go. That's what we're after. And then you can just dab it with your fingers to smooth it out slightly. Just like that. Obviously, the more you stipple in one spot, the more prominent the colour will be. Just feather that bit out there. There you go. So as you can see now, it's got some very nice little rust patches on here. This is the effect we were after. So, we used the brown red basically as a base. And then what we've done is we've used this over the top as a highlight, so it gives it more of a focus colour. So when you've got obviously everything on the base, it just makes it a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to clean my brush off, and then we're going to move on to the next step. And this step is, we are now going to go over with a silver. So what we're going to do, we're going to use our last paint, which is the Model Air Vallejo. So I use this one because I want to do a stippling effect, but I'm going to be doing it with something different. So what I'm going to be doing my stippling effect with is, you can probably hear it from the sounds, this, a little piece of sponge. So this is a little bit of sponge that I've got from blister packs over the years, from just models and bits and bobs. You don't need a lot, you just take a little bit, rip a little piece off. And then what we're going to do, we're going to get this part here, we're going to put a little bit of silver onto our palette, and then we're going to dab it off. So what we're going to do, we're going to find a little patch on our palette, and we're going to dab it around until hardly any paint comes off. And then what we're going to do, we're going to get our base, and then we're just going to dab around the parts you think would get worn. So like around the edges, we've got our hazard stripes here, so they're going to get walked on at some point, so we'll just give them a little dab here and there around the edges of these bits here, just like this. But you can control it. The good thing with this is, obviously, because you've got paint on the end of here, you know, you don't have to just stab at it and that's done. You can just lightly just tap, so hardly any paint even comes off, just like that. And I usually go around onto the rusty parts as well, around the edges, just because, you know, they're the parts that are going to get worn the most, especially on the black areas here. There we go, just like that. So there's that part done. So we've got two little bits that we're going to do now. These are probably the easiest and quickest. We're going to get our earth shade again, and what we're going to do, we're just going to go into those rivets that are on the hazard stripes. So I'm using a little tiny brush for this because I do want to be quite precise with this. And then what we're going to do, we're just going to dab that into the recessed area, but only on the yellow part. So if these rivets were on black, you know, I wouldn't even bother. But because these are on yellow, I want them to have a little bit of a more prominent stature. So we're just going to dab that around the rivet, just like this. And as you can see now, from obviously on the video, it looks a lot more prominent from me looking at it, but you can see now on the video, these rivets are now sticking out, which is it's basically the effect we're going for. So you can also do it if you've got this one here, you know, you can just pop a little bit on there, just like that, and then wipe that off. Pretty much it. Just do a little bit in this bit here still again. There we go, lovely. So we're now going to come to the final part, which is the null, well, I say null null, you can use null null, but I'm going to go back to the dark tone again, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use this to just shade around all the recesses. So I'm going to load up my brush, I'm going to go all around these lines, all these panel lines here, and that should just bring it out a little bit more. Same with the rivets as well. And to do that, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to run my brush along the edge, just like that. And as you can see there, that's now made that line very, very dark, so it has a nice little shade. And obviously these aren't going to be 100% clean, you know, people are walking on these all the time, God knows what's getting chucked on these. But these are going to be for my gang that I've just started, so these are going to be for my Orlocks. So I did want a very industrial theme to them, because I am going to have these as basically like scrap immersions. That's my kind of my backstory. Just going to go around these little deep recess parts here as well. There we go. And we've just got a few more bits to do. So parts like this here. These parts I wouldn't usually worry about doing them too much. Just give them a quick light drag over, because you don't want to block all that area in there and then just lose all of that paint that's in the recesses. So we're just going to do the same for this one, just drag it lightly across. I'm then going to go over all of these little grill parts as well, just fill them in with a bit of Nuln Oil, just because I want them to be a little bit dark. And obviously with the matte black we've used, it can tend to have a little bit of a light undertone. Just fill this bit up here, pop a bit on all the rivets, and there we have it. That is pretty much it. So, you know, it's a very good method for doing the bases. If you have a whole load of these bases to do, this is a very efficient way of doing them, because you can do these step by step. You can literally just have them all laid out, and you can just do one step at a time. You know, paint all the yellow, attach all the hazard stripes, paint them, then you can do all the rust and stuff. But as you can see, these two bases, they're very similar. They don't look out of place with each other. They don't look, you know, they don't look like they should be from different gangs or anything. They're both pretty much exactly the same paint, and I did these both a day apart, so you couldn't even tell that these have been painted a day apart. And that's the good thing about this, is you don't need a lot of paints. You use I used 2 makeup brushes and a couple of old scrappy brushes, and that's it. And then you just go around and rim the bases black, and then you're pretty much ready for your little Necromunda chaps when they're painted to sit on top. So mine aren't painted at the moment, but I will probably do a tutorial on how to paint those in the future, probably within the next couple of weeks actually. But I hope this was a little bit informative for you. I hope this did help a little bit in people that are having a little trouble, I don't know, painting Necromunda bases, and I hope this just gives you a little bit of an idea of an alternative scheme you can use. You can change up the rust, you can use the lilac oxide if you wanted to, you could put a bit of that in there. What I'll probably do on a few of my bases is I will probably use a little bit of this, a little bit of moot green air, and I'll probably do some little blobs of moot green on there for a little bit of radioactive waste. There's so much you can add to these bases. There's no right or wrong way of doing these. But I hope this has helped, and I hope this has been a fun little tutorial. And drop me a comment, tell me how you got on with doing yours. Give us a share if you feel like it. And I hope I see you all in the next tutorial. So happy wargaming, guys. Thanks for watching.